Hey there, it's your friend Stormy Warren here, and I want to invite you to my new home, the Big 615, exclusively on TuneIn. So what is the Big 615? Well, simply put, it's the official home of country music broadcasting live from Nashville to the world. Download the TuneIn app from the App Store. That's TuneIn. And by the way, yes, it's free. You can also ask your device to play the Big 615 on TuneIn. Get the latest on country music from your favorite artists to the hottest songs climbing up the charts. Oh, and it's commercial free. That means a whole lot more music and a whole lot more country. Hear it all on the Stormy Warren Show, weekdays from 7 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central. Download the TuneIn app from the App Store. That's TuneIn. And by the way, yes, it's free. You can also ask your device to play the Big 615 on TuneIn. And I look forward to having you join me on the Big 615.
This is your country station.
The Big 615.
This is Sports Daily on Wichita's #1 sports radio, 97.5 and 1240 KFH.
All right, welcome back into Sports Daily. It's hour number 2. It's all Brockton Savage here on a Friday edition. Odyssey and KUIN bring you Concerts in the Park, sponsored by IHOP. Free live music Friday from 8 to 10 in Andover Central Park at the Capitol Federal Amphitheater, 1607 East Central Avenue in Andover this Friday. Ante up. Bring your lawn chairs, blankets, extra cash for the food trucks. No coolers allowed. Gates open tonight at 6:30. Again tonight, 8 to 10 o'clock. Concerts in the park there in Andover. Paul, welcome back into Sports Daily. Max Power producing for us. The IHOP hotline is open, 869-1240. Let's talk a little college sports here, Paul. We'll start with the Big 12. The Big 12 boasting that it is leading the way, according to Open Doors, in NIL opportunities. Now, let's not be naive here to this, Paul. We know that that's partly and largely due to Texas and Oklahoma, who are leaving. So I feel like that's kind of a weird boast, because when those guys leave, it's not. But I think even with that, it is sort of a badge of honor, because the Big 12, and as it relates to all the happenings nationally, I think the Big 12 is doing a really good job of showing just how passionate the fan bases in this league are for college sports. Which is why you see some of that. But it's going to go down when Texas and Oklahoma leave, two of the biggest powerhouses financially in college sports.
Well, it's
two of the top 5, I think it is,
right,
by the most recent reporting. So naturally, those two schools are going to bring a lot to the table there, and you're going to lose that when they leave. It's an interesting dynamic. I'm intrigued by that report, but I think the reality of it is pretty obvious.
Mm-hmm. And we've seen this act out before. I mean, I remember when Arkansas left the old Southwest Conference and ended up being in the SEC. They were kind of gone and not heard from again. And it could very well be the same thing with Oklahoma and Texas going to a conference like the SEC. Which, let's face it, it's a battle. I mean, it is. I mean, can only be one big champion, from the SEC. Only one a year. That's all you can have. And there's so many good teams that, you're going to spread that around quite a bit. And Alabama right now is kind of the top dog at this point. Georgia right there, right with them. Probably 2 co-top dogs, if you wanted to put it that way. But I think what's going to happen is that you're going to see the Big 12 react. And I think react in a good way with regards to how do we replace, how do we get around the University of Texas, the University of Oklahoma, and that is to bring in a few more teams that are really special, that bring something special or the potential of something special to the league. And I'm talking about an Arizona, maybe a Utah. I'm talking about Colorado. I'm talking about maybe even going a little further east than that, maybe even to a Washington or an Oregon. I think I like taking those 2 teams as well, and maybe a UConn.
I mean, sure you do, but they don't necessarily want to come yet. Right now,
not yet.
Right now,
yet. Yes,
there's the chicken and egg game happening with the Pac-12 right now, and Arizona and Colorado potentially, and whoever else might be in there, but. The Pac-12 keeps saying it has this deal done, and they just won't say what it is, I think, because they don't want their teams to leave. Here's what I would say. If the deal is so great, they would already be talking about it because they don't want their teams to leave. I suspect that the fact that this has dragged on this long means it's not as good as they'd hoped, and they're just trying to stall as long as they can potentially to keep their teams from leaving. So I don't know what's going to happen. San Diego State's weird deadline that they sort of shot themselves in the foot on is today. But even in the Big 12 as it currently stands, let's say they don't add anybody, I would love to see that NIL list after Texas and Oklahoma leave, even if it's just what it is now, because that's where it's like, okay, obviously the SEC and the Big Ten are going to stay ahead.
Well, you don't need to see that.
Where then does the Big 12 rank among everybody else?
Right. Well, you don't need to worry about seeing that list after Texas and Oklahoma because there's going to be other additional. And then Jacob, you can take a look at that list critically and say, well, I get this, because there's going to be some replacements. And it may be doozies that replace. I don't think it's going to be nobodies. It's going to be those teams that will obviously help the profile with regards to the Big 12. Now, speaking of the Pac-12, here's why you don't know what you don't know. Here's why they think they have a deal, and they're not releasing it. They're not bragging on it. And you're a broadcast guy. You know more about this than I do, so I'll let you expand on it. But I'm guessing, and my guess is, that a large portion of this deal has to do with streaming. Streaming is not the thing you want to do yet in college sports. I'm not saying that it won't be.
It's not the most high. It's better.
Yes.
It's certainly better than it was.
It's better than it was.
But it's not where you want to exclusively live.
And that,
right? Like you don't. That's not going to put more eyeballs on your product. It may.
Yes.
It may. People may pay as much for it as far as these networks that would pay to stream you. But you're not. You just simply were not to the point yet where you're going to have as many eyeballs.
That's why I think.
And so that's where we get into this. I think a part of this chicken and egg is even if the Pac-12 matches the Big 12 dollars, which is possible. I think it's totally possible. If it's through streaming, they're not going to match the eyeballs, and that matters to these programs as well.
Right.
So, that's the thing there. And look, this all comes as ESPN, as the reports come out that they're about to lay off a bunch of people. Andrew Marchand, I think, one of the sports media guys is reporting Jeff Van Gundy was let go by ESPN today, who is as good an in-game basketball analyst as I've ever seen, especially at the NBA level. In fact, I don't think I've seen anybody better than him. He is universally liked, and ESPN just let him go today because they're trying to cut costs. Something is looming economically, right? And these networks are all cutting. So the Big 12's already swooped in, right, and got its deal. I just don't know what sort of appetite there is right now for a massive Pac-12 deal.
Well, that's why you're right. You wonder why the Pac-12 isn't hyping this deal.
Streaming, there would be, because that, for the same reason Amazon was willing to pay billions for the NFL, because if they can drive subscriptions to their service, that has a totally different value than it does to
right.
Fox,
but there's a huge
who's more
difference.
Concerned about selling ads.
There's a huge difference between the Pac-12 and the NFL. Come on now. I mean, that's on how many would
totally, but there's a huge difference in billions and tens of millions too, right?
Yeah,
so
no, that's true.
You're talking about a millions,
right?
So it's just I don't know, or 1,000 million. Sorry, you're just talking about. What is the reality of the situation, and where does the Big 12? The absolute ace move was to get the deal done quickly, because now we're in a sense, if you're the Pac-12, where you don't know where the climate of the industry is for the next, and it'll turn back, right? Like these things go in cycles. So how long does this last? 2 or 3 years? Like what does the Pac-12 do? Like the timing of it all is what I think is ultimately going to really, really hurt the Pac-12. And I saw Pat Forty, I think, put something out and said, well, let's, the Pac-12 and the ACC are winning all these championships. Let's stop just thinking about the money in this. But you can't really do that, right? Like you can't really stop thinking about the money, because it's the ultimate driver of the landscape of the, of the industry in college sports, of what it's going to look like in the near future. Mm-hmm. And it does matter. And they will win fewer championships if they don't have the money that the other leagues have to operate with. And I don't know what's going to happen. I still think, my gut still says Arizona and Colorado are coming to the Big 12. I still think that's what's going to happen, at least those two, because I think at some point when push comes to shove, If the Pac-12 had a better deal than the Big 12, we'd already know about it.
You got that right.
The longer it goes, the more likely it is that it's not as good. And if you're those schools, you got to take what's there for you and take the best thing. And that's the thing, Paul, when you see these reports like NIL spending is higher in the Big 12, ratings typically are much higher in the Big 12. Like if I'm another team, and especially a team, let's take Colorado has obvious ties to the Big 12. I mean, you don't have to really explain that one. But Arizona, who has always been a Pac-12 brand. But man, Arizona basketball, it's one of the few places where basketball is at the same level as football. And I mean that like from the fans' perspective, not money generating or anything, but from a fan's perspective. So when you look at the Big 12, which is clearly going to be the best basketball league, and that matters, right? Like that matters a little bit. And you know that, man, there's probably basketball money on the table if we go there too. So it's not just then the football money. It's also because the Big 12's got big plans with basketball. Don't think that it doesn't, because it does. I don't know. It's this deadline of San Diego State, and the Pac-12 keeps, pulling the football out from underneath everybody like Lucy on Charlie Brown when they think they're going to know what it is. And at some point, some of these schools are going to get sick of waiting, Paul, because I don't know how you justify it to your, Board of Regents, to your alumni, to whoever, if you've got this great offer sitting there, but you don't know what else is there on the other side of it. Like, how do you justify not taking the better deal? I don't know.
Right. And I think I can justify exactly what you're saying by just asking you a question. When was the last time in a within the boundaries of the Pac-12, when was the last time you heard Oregon State mentioned, Washington State mentioned,
I hope those two don't become casualties. I really do.
But see,
they might.
But that's the point. You rarely hear about them. You hear about Washington and you hear about Oregon. Of course, Oregon being kind of a Nike school because of all the help they get from the Phil Knight. I mean, that's you hear about but when you start not hearing about schools, even the University of California to a lesser extent, you don't hear anything about these schools. Where are they going? What are they doing? How are they involved? What is going on with these schools? And they're not. And either they have stuck their head in the ground and said, we don't have much of a choice. We got to roll with the punches on this, because that's what tells me that the Pac-12 is in trouble, because we do not hear about the membership as a whole with regards to the Pac-12, and we hear about. We hear about the Big 12 all the time. I mean, we hear about West Virginia. Now they've got some help on the East Coast with Carolina, maybe bringing in Memphis at a later date. Cincinnati's not all that far, from West Virginia. You brought them help. But when was the last time we heard, what are you doing for Oregon State and Washington State? Jacob, I haven't heard those two schools mentioned by name
they're
in
gonna be
6 months.
Sort of like, Paul, Kansas State and probably Kansas in reality, even though that wasn't the perception, but like Oklahoma State maybe, or Baylor. Like, they're going to be happy to still be in a league, like a Power 5 league.
Yeah.
There's not like, it's not like they're in the conversation being mentioned as that school that, and I don't mean that as any offense to any of them. It's just the reality of the situation. So, like for Oregon State and Washington State, I'm sure they're just like, boy, I wonder where the dust settles on this, and I hope we're still in the Pac-12 and the Pac-12 still exists. Because nobody's like beating down the door to go add Oregon State and Washington State. That doesn't mean anything. What about, Washington and Oregon? We know they want to join the Big Ten. Well, I remember that from the very beginning of all this. But the Big Ten doesn't want them yet.
Yeah.
Right? So,
that's what we hear.
But the second the Big Ten does, they'll be gone.
Yeah.
And so then it becomes, can a Power 5 league exist with Stanford and Cal and Washington State and Oregon State and Arizona State and San Diego State perhaps, or should San Diego State try to get into the Big 12? Like, I don't know. It's going to be so far behind the other Power 5s, probably. And if they add San Diego State and SMU, that could offset a little bit, and maybe they can continue to expand and, get themselves back to respectability. But it's not going to be as an attractive a TV product. It's already a challenge for them because of the time zone.
Right.
When you exclusively live in that time zone, you've got a challenge. Whereas, like from the Big 12's perspective, we don't want to exclusively live in that time zone. We just want like one football game a week in that time zone, right? Maybe two. That's all we need to expand our TV package. So the Pac-12 is in a tough spot. I don't see it. I don't see a light at the end of the tunnel for the Pac-12. I really, really don't. They don't have the L.A. market anymore with whatever moves forward. And without the L.A. market, like, what do you have? The Bay Area? The Bay Area doesn't care about college sports, Paul.
No.
Like, that's just not in the DNA there. It's
Right.
it's hard enough in L.A. versus the Bay Area, or like, I don't know what you're banking on there. Whereas in our part of the country, we don't have the beautiful weather and the beaches and all of these things, and we got football, right? In when it's cold, we got football and we got basketball, and that's kind of what we do here. Right, and that's why we put eyeballs on these games.
Right.
And so I don't know. I think this goes the Big 12's way. I would still sit here on June 30th, which could be a big day before the day's over. I think Arizona and Colorado at minimum are coming. I think they're going to join the Big 12 because I don't know what the Pac-12 is going to offer them that would tell them not to.
But who would want to stay with the Pac-12 at that point? You lose the teams that you think that are going to go to the Big 12.
Oregon and Washington still have tremendous value. I mean, you can build around Oregon and Washington, I think. But it's just like for those specific schools, it makes too much sense. Like geographically, it makes sense. It aligns with, what is to some degree. For the Big 12, it's obvious. You get into Denver and Phoenix and you get those time zones. Like that's a no-brainer for the Big 12. Like if you could pick two spots for the Big 12, I mean, I'm not sure that those aren't even more attractive at that point than Washington would be. Maybe not Oregon, but when you're talking about television footprint and exposure, and you got Prime in Colorado, and for as long as he's there, that's a hot ticket. They're no-brainer additions to me, and if I'm them, it's becoming more no-brainer to go because I don't know what the alternative is. And even if the alternative is the same money, it's not going to be the same eyeballs.
Right. And, of course, eyeballs is what it's all about, particularly with NIL. I mean,
It's about both.
It's about both. Yes, it's about both. And I think that you're probably correct. This is going to go the way of the Big 12. And here again, human nature, you and I have been around the block at least a couple of times. And the comment that you made when this segment first started, the fact that the Pac-12 isn't hyping this tells volumes, doesn't it? It really does.
We get reports, Paul, every day of these networks cutting and slashing and trimming and preparing for this next wave because everybody can see it coming. Something is coming, right? Everybody's trying to prepare for it. I just don't know in that climate what network is going to step up and boast that sort of investment in a Pac-12 without USC and UCLA. Hell, even a Pac-12 with USC and UCLA. Like, it's too late. When the Big 12 got there, and it's timing too. If the Big 12, if you flip the tables, I don't think there'd be a network lining up for the Big 12 right now either. That's why it was so smart for them to negotiate early. It was so forward-thinking because of what's happening right now. Networks are slashing payroll to try to save money. I just don't know what appetite is there when they all already have other leagues signed up, right? To add that sort of financial commitment when they're, on the other hand, trying to cut so much of it back. I don't know, man. I think the Pac-12's in real trouble.
Well, there's no question about that. We'll see how it plays out.
Way,
yeah, go
Paul,
ahead.
I don't want them to be in big trouble. Like we've sort of seen this as this contest between the Big 12 and the Pac-12. I don't want the Pac-12 to be in any trouble. I would like for the Big 12 to get a couple of their schools for selfish reasons, but I want the Pac-12 to still have a seat at the Power 5 table. I think that's important to stretch college sports all across the country. I think they are in trouble.
Well, I've never really cared about the Pac-12. I mean, part of it is the time zone, and by the time their games start playing, many occasions, how many times have you flipped on the TV and there's a game in the Pac-12 starting at 9 o'clock in the evening, and you've just finished watching about 8 hours of football on television, and you're footballed out. And so I'll be one of those guys to admit that I've never developed a desire to follow Pac-12 football, and I think time has a lot to do with it. Even when they were, running back you at USC and all the great coaches, the Robinsons and all those guys that have come through the Pac-12, but I've never had an interest. I still don't, but I could certainly bring in those schools that are in the Rocky Mountain area. That would be the Arizona State, Utah, Colorado. They have great interest to me. I will follow them. I will watch those games as they play Big 12 football. I will follow them and care about what they do as much as all the other Big 12 teams. And that's kind of where I'm hoping we end up. I don't know if that is where we'll end up, but I think there's a real chance. I think the wild card is Arizona State for some reason. And I don't know why, other than the fact they seem lukewarm to everything. In fact, it may be that Arizona State just seems to kind of have their head in the sand halfway. I don't know what the situation is, but with Arizona State, they seem to have a desire to try to keep the Pac-12 together, but they're in the wrong location to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know what Arizona State brings. Let's just keep this date by the end of today, because June 30th has become San Diego State's deadline, and we keep hearing the thing get kicked down the road for the Pac-12. Okay. I don't know. Something could happen today.
What happens if you don't hear anything? Before we go to break, you've said several times.
I think the chances go up. The chances go up that Colorado and Arizona leave. I mean, go to the Big 12 because I just don't know how much longer they can wait. 869-1240 is the IHOP hotline. Paul and I will take a break. We'll come back. Let's chat a little bit. Paul, so Texas and Oklahoma just got brought up there. What does the final year look like for them in the Big 12?
Good question.
How much intrigue is there in them playing a final year in the Big 12? We'll come back. We'll talk about it next on Sports Data.
Let's do this thing. Go!
Sports Daily is on KFH.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Sports Daily on KFH. It's Albrocht, it's Caster. Glad to be here with you on this week-ending Friday edition of the program. What's up, Paul?
Well, you called me Tommy Caster. I mean, come on.
My bad.
Who looks better, me or Tommy? Come on. I mean, seriously. How can you get us mixed up?
I'll let the listeners and the viewers decide that. You're hearing us here on KFH. If you want to see and take a look, be warned. You can do that on Facebook, on YouTube, on Twitter. Glad to be here with you, Paul. We always tend to lean into college sports just a little bit. Texas and Oklahoma are about to come into their final years in the Big 12. So I think Texas is a contender for sure. I think Texas and Kansas State are probably going to sit at the top of most preseason predictions. We're talking about football. Oklahoma, I think, could always get into the mix. I think there is a massive room for Venables to, have a correction this year. I'm not going to predict it. I think it'll be Texas or Kansas State. But what do you think of this last year? How will it be received? Are they just going to get booed out of the building wherever they play? I think that will probably come into play to some degree. I am not offended that they left. Like, it just doesn't offend me the way it does some people, because I think it's natural progression. I think they almost don't fit as much anymore in the Big 12 because they have so much of a different, playing field and financial value anyway. And it's not a competition thing. It's just like a, monetary value thing. So if they don't fit, and we're going to continue to, like, the Longhorn Network stuff. Like, I was more bothered by all that than I am about them leaving. And I'm excited about the teams coming in. So it's not like an ill will thing for me, Paul. I've said this before. They'll immediately become two of my favorite teams to root for in the SEC. I'd much rather see Texas or Oklahoma win a SEC football game than Alabama or LSU. But I know a lot of people don't feel that way. A lot of people want them to go in there and get their tails kicked around a little bit, kind of like what's happened to A&M.
Well, count me in that mix right there. You know, a little tail kicking won't hurt my feelings one iota. I can tell you that right now. But
well,
anyway,
maybe in the beginning,
maybe,
but
so.
Eventually, don't you think you'll still tend to root for those two teams over the traditional SEC schools?
No. I absolutely no. I don't believe that I will. And here's the one thing that I do know. I know the psychology of football, having been around it nearly my entire adult life. And the psychology is that this particular year, 2023, the last season for Oklahoma and Texas, they are going to be circled on every Big 12 opponent. Now, some of these teams that are in the Big 12 that are going to play Texas and Oklahoma aren't going to have the manpower to match up. They're not going to win those games, but their date's going to be circled on the calendar. There is nobody on this schedule, if you have Oklahoma and Texas on your schedule, that you would rather beat than them. I don't even care if it's your rival, your arch rival. They are third this year if you're going to play Oklahoma and Texas. Now, for me, as a Baylor Bear, we only have Texas. We, with all the new additions being added into the schedule, you can't get everybody. Oklahoma for Baylor has been left off that schedule. Darn it! One more chance to kick their butts on their way out the door. And for that, I am very, very sad. But we do have Texas. And I've been to Texas. I played at Texas. I want to beat them. I want to beat Texas worse than I want to beat anybody else in this league. And there are other teams that I want to beat, but not as bad as I want to beat Texas. I want Texas's hide on my fireplace mantle. That's what I want. As I wave to them goodbye to a conference that you'll never win a championship in. Goodbye, good riddance, have fun getting your tails kicked. So that's kind of where I'm at. Was that a little rough? Was that a little tough?
I think that's the norm. And for those that don't know, Paul played college football at Baylor. That's where that comes from. I think there are far more people, Paul, that feel the way that you do than feel the way I do. I get it. I get why they're leaving. I would make the exact same decision if I were them, and I think they owe it to their, to their schools to do it. So I get it. I don't take as much offense to it. And I don't want to root for the SEC teams. I'm kind of glad there's a little invasion happening. Here's what's so funny about it. I grew up, I didn't like A&M at all. Didn't like Oklahoma growing up at all. I don't care as much anymore. But man, the second A&M got into the SEC, I'm rooting for A&M in those games. I'm rooting for Missouri in those games. I know KU fans don't want to hear that, but I love the invasion feel of them coming in there. And I'm so sick of the SEC teams. I'm not from that part of the country. I'm still from where I'm from. So, I won't mind it in year one, sort of like hey, this is your punishment. Take your licks and like it. I won't. Boy, I think if Texas could ever find the right coach again, Paul, it ain't gonna matter where they play in the NIL world, but they cannot quite get there. And will they do that in the SEC? Let's see this year if they can even do it in the Big 12.
Right.
But I do think they'll be one of the two favorites. How about basketball? I am so dadgum excited for this blended basketball league. We're only going to get 1 year of it, Paul, just one. But when you got a league with Kansas and Baylor and Texas and Kansas State and Houston and all the other, Texas Tech now, all these other, it is going to be one of the best college basketball things I think that we've ever had. And it will stay great when they leave, but this year will be the best year of it. Not knowing what's going to happen with any of the Pac-12 schools, it's going to be so much fun in basketball this year. Oh, my
goodness. Well, and you're right. I mean, we look at the Big 12 in basketball right now. Who is an easy win? I mean, who's that one win that you can get and count on? Just pencil it in. It's an automatic. I can't think of anybody. I don't know who it will be.
I can't either.
And I think
can't either.
once we get Fitz back on, we talk a little basketball. He's going to be. This is wide open, just like it was last year. Just like it was in this last year. Every game was a tough game, was a meaningful game. Every game, one team could beat the other on any given night, and that's sort of the beautiful thing. I mean, look, you got a couple of national champions in the last few years in the Big 12. I mean, how good does this get? How good does this league get? And by the way, you had mentioned earlier in our segment about TV rights and that kind of thing with basketball. How do you make basketball as important as football? I keep, I'm not sure. And as a TV guy, maybe you have some insight. But the question I wanted to ask,
it's not going to be as important. But I've said so many times, I think that Big 12 basketball, if expansion happens, and let's say that scenario that you've heard rumored around of UConn, Arizona, Colorado, San Diego State. Let's just say it's that.
Okay.
But I think it would be more than that because you've heard rumors of Gonzaga, right, being flirted with. And, let's just say they add the teams that they've been rumored to. It will become the second best basketball product in the world, if it's not already. But it would be hands down behind the NBA the best basketball product in the world. And that has tremendous value and would have tremendous national value too. Because in that time of the year, Paul, other than the NBA, right, like you kind of are, it's college basketball season. And if you can boast that, where you've got all these future NBA players playing and you've got all these competitive, like it would be, like the regular season would just be insanity every single night, every single game. It would be a more valuable college product outside of football than we've ever seen before, and I think that's where this is headed. Now, the timing of it, I'm not 100. I don't know. I don't know how quickly, that ultimate expansion where you go and you poach all these traditional basketball powers and you just keep adding them to this incredible league. I don't know how quickly that can happen, but I think it's going to happen eventually, and I think it's going to be, for us in this part of the world and what we care about, one of the greatest things sports-wise that's ever happened, because I think it's just going to be so much fun every night.
Well,
and, in a pipe dream, Paul, like to take a total sideways turn on this, it's why I'm so eager for Wichita State to return to a level where they're relevant nationally every year, because if that mega expansion ever were to happen and teams without football are ever brought into the mix, like if the Big East becomes something that the Big 12 is interested in on a larger scale and Gonzaga, it ain't going to hurt to have Wichita State be very nationally relevant.
No.
Because facilities-wise, when it comes to the other sports, Wichita State can hang, right? And that you always want to just have that phone available to you. You want Charles Koch Arena selling out every night again.
Right.
You want all these facilities in place, all of these things in place, because if that larger expansion ever happens, where they can figure out a revenue model where non-football schools are able to come in and, earn less, obviously, but still, a tremendous opportunity for them. You want Wichita State and Creighton and whoever to have as much relevancy as you can, because maybe, just maybe, you could find a way to squeeze in there.
All right. Can I ask a question real quick? Because this may be naive, and you might think, Savage, you're being awful naive on this question. But it's a question that I don't know the answer to. You just talked about how great basketball will be in the Big 12. How do you monetize it?
You expand time zones and you convince the networks of how valuable your product is. The branding of it, which that work is being done by Yormark now with all the basketball leagues in New York City and bringing in celebrities to conference tournaments, and you just want people to talk about it and be interested in it, and the more big names and celebrities that are talking about it and interested in it, the more generally the general public starts talking about it and becoming interested in it and watching it, and viewership drives revenue dollars. And if you can create this brand of this is the best thing there is that's not the NBA, I do think there's an appetite for that.
Yeah.
I think there are things about college basketball that are more attractive on a nightly basis than even in the NBA. Games are fast, right? They're they are high energy all the way through. You're not going to have load management or anything. I think from a fan's perspective, it's why since I moved here, Paul, I watch almost exclusively college basketball during the regular season. And I think that there's a lot of people like that. And I think the more you have people talking about it, the more valuable it becomes. And then the elephant in the room is, how do you separate it from football, right? Can you do a separate basketball, men's and women's, by the way? I don't know that there's a faster growing sport in the country than women's basketball. You do it for both. You expand that into a separate deal that allows you to go add basketball-only schools or non-football schools, and then you create the monetary value on a secondary level. It's not just looped in with whatever the football deal ends up being.
Well, that's a nice job of answering my question, and I get exactly what you're saying. I just wasn't sure whether it's on a separate basis or a togetherness with football, but I get what you're saying. In other words, eyeballs. How important is it to get eyeballs? And if you're the best basketball conference and the second best basketball organization in the world, then you're going to get a certain amount of eyeballs. And you're right. Every night's going to be a battle. And I don't care which team it is in the Big 12. It's going to be a battle. I don't care if it's Kansas, at Texas Tech, pick your school. It's going to be a battle. And, I'm really looking forward to it. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how the new teams fit in. Cincinnati's got a lot of upside. There's going to be a lot of upside with all the teams that are going to be joining the league this year. I mean, look at Central Florida. What a nice run they had. How good are they? Well, we don't know, but they've been pretty good in the last, few months. So there you go.
Yeah, it'll be fun. It'll be fine. It'll be exciting. I think it probably won't be here on the basketball front as quickly as we might selfishly want it to be.
I got you.
But we can, it's just not the right, it's not the right economic climate for it right now. Yeah. And if it's 2025 when some people predict like this unease will begin to lift, I don't know, Paul. I don't know. We'll just. I think we'll have to wait longer than we would hope. Yeah.
Oklahoma, Texas, or the rest of the Big 12. Who you got?
In football. In football. I'll take the rest of the Big 12.
Me too. I would too. Yes, I would. That's. I think you're onto something there. Now, at first blush,
Kansas State will wear that badge, I think, and lead the forefront. But I think Kansas State and Texas are so close that I would just take the remainder and take the Kansas State side.
Good point. I think you're exactly right. That's what I would do as well. Just asking.
Paul, Hard Knocks is rumored to be the Jets this year. I don't think the Jets want it. I think it's a no-brainer for the NFL. That would be one that would probably be worth watching, right? You're a Hard Knocks guy. I've never watched any of it. But I would think as juicy as it would ever be, and I don't know because I don't watch it, this would be one that would be worth, your time as a fan to enjoy this one with Aaron Rodgers there now.
Well, you've got Aaron Rodgers there, and I know that's why you're saying, wouldn't this be fascinating with Aaron Rodgers? But that's not the way Hard Knocks always wins. It's not always the best, the most famous, the best-known player that Hard Knocks kind of latches onto. Now, when the Houston Texans were the subject of Hard Knocks, J.J. Watt was their defensive end, and he was one of those guys that, Hard Knocks hung around, had a mic on him at all times practically, and it was fascinating. I became a J.J. Watts fan with that season of Hard Knocks with the Texans. Now, with that being said, there's no guarantee that we ever hear a word out of Aaron Rodgers. We might. I don't know. You will when you're on the practice field on those kind of sequences. More than likely, they'll pick some stuff up from him. But it would be fascinating if he was the guy that came in and he was the one that was followed. I imagine they don't want that, though, because there's a learning curve in any new program. And I don't care if you're experienced like an Aaron Rodgers, you're a future Hall of Famer like an Aaron Rodgers. There's a lot to learn in a new system, a lot of players to get to know. And a lot of blocking schemes and, all the routes and all the things with the coverages that'll be thrown at him. So there's a lot to learn. I don't know that he would be the subject. But with that being said, there's a certain attraction to Hard Knocks with the Jets because, it's a team that I think most of us think is going to be a contender. We're going to see some preseason games with action, and you'll get a feel for them. There's a Wichita connection at running back with the Jets. There's all kinds of things that I think could be fascinating. I think that we could actually have a lot of fun with the Jets. I really think it's a good one. But you're right, Jacob. The Jets don't want it. Most of these teams believe that Hard Knocks is a distraction. I'm not so sure
it's
that
a distraction.
I'm not so sure they're not right. It probably is. But man, what a fantastic marketing tool by the NFL to keep their product, fresh and in front of fans and that kind of thing. It's a fascinating look. And I've said this before on this show. It's the greatest example of what really goes on in meeting rooms and locker rooms and weight rooms, on the practice field, on buses, on airplanes, in the locker room before games. It is without a doubt the greatest show that has ever been put on air, showing what it's actually like in an NFL locker room.
Yeah, look, the other appeal to us here is Breece Hall, right?
Well, Breece Hall, I mentioned the Wichita connection.
Yeah. Would be really, really interesting dynamic. But what is the number one concern I think people have right now, if you're a Jets fan or if you're wondering how good they might be, it's that Aaron Rodgers doesn't jive with these teammates right away. It's been relatively well documented that takes some time with Rodgers. He has his guys that he's comfortable with, his coaches. They brought in Hackett. But how quickly is he going to gel with young receivers? Because they do have a pretty young wide receiver group there. How quickly does that happen? I think that we could get some insight to that from Hard Knocks, perhaps. Aaron Rodgers is very savvy. He's very aware of the way people are perceiving him, and he's very direct in I think the messaging he wants to put out there, so he can control some of that. But almost, Paul, I wonder if they can't use it to their advantage, right? Okay, you're Aaron Rodgers, you're in a room, and the circumstances are certainly different. It was a little rocky there in Green Bay at the end. But you come in, the camera's on you, right? You're in a wide receiver meeting. Well, let's take this as a moment to show everybody how great we're doing, how much we all enjoy each other. I mean, there's some of it where I think you could use it to your advantage if you're the Jets as well. And I don't know how invasive Hard Knocks is, and I don't know how long it's invasive, right? Is it just training camp? Is it all of training camp,
right?
Paul,
and
some of training camp?
Starting at the beginning of training camp through the first three or the first 2 to 3 preseason games. I can't remember if it's 2 or 3, but it's right in there. So yeah, it goes a long way and even gets into game conditions and that kind of thing.
Well,
so
maybe it's harder to fake it then. Maybe it is harder to fake it. But I do think somebody really smart like Rodgers could use this to his advantage and just try to set the tone early that, man, I'm fitting in here so well. Like, it has gone so well here, and I'm so happy here, and I'm great with the teammates and all. I mean, you could use that to your advantage too, because that – right. The less ammo you can give your detractors, or more importantly, the opposition in the NFL when everything is so tight anyway, okay, I think you could use it. Mm-hmm. I mean, Hard Knocks, Paul, has something to do with why everybody loves the Lions this year, right? Like, everybody's on the Lions.
I'm on them. I think they're a team to reckon with. What do you think of that?
I think Minnesota's going to beat them in the division. That's what I think of that.
Well, I don't know that. I don't know that I believe that.
Well, right, and the reason is why?
Hard Knocks. I got to know guys.
Because you watched it. You got the fever last year.
Dan Campbell. I am a Dan Campbell fan at this point.
I know you are, Paul. I think you're wired the same way, and so you've gravitated to that. That's what I mean. Like, I think there is some opportunity, if you're Rodgers, to sort of rally the fan base and rally everybody behind what you're doing. And that sort of momentum is contagious. Like, that stuff matters when everybody's happy and, people are writing positive stories and talking about you in a positive light. Like, that stuff does matter. And I think it matters especially for young players who haven't been through it. So a savvy guy like Rodgers, you don't want controversy swirling around your locker room. He knows that.
That's right.
He isn't always good at making it not happen, right? But he knows that. And I think that he could use this to his advantage. I would suspect, Paul, that whether it's real or it's not, that we will get the impression coming out of Hard Knocks that it is all sunshine and roses at Jets camp. That's my prediction to you, is that when Hard Knocks is done, that everybody is going to talk about how well Rodgers is fitting in there.
Right.
And I think will be very intentional.
Right.
And I think that that's what will go into the season feeling.
And
it won't be the other way. It won't be that Rodgers is screaming at guys and can't get on the same page. It won't be that. He's too smart.
Yeah, he's too smart. And by the way, if you're a receiver and you're on the New York Jets, how many times you get a chance to have a guy who's, knocking on the door of around 75,000 yards, going to be in a Hall of Fame, a guy who can deliver the ball. He's going to make you look good. He's going to help you get a raise for your next contract. Yep. Aaron Rodgers is only going to help you. And if you're an offensive lineman, you have a chance to block for one of the top 5-10 quarterbacks in the history of the NFL. Man, I'll tell you what, this is only going to work out well for the New York Jets. And Aaron Rodgers wants to be there. This is where he wants to be. I think it's going to be a great thing. It's going to be a great thing for everybody.
It'll be interesting. You'll watch it, Paul, and report to me because I won't watch it. I never do. 869-1240 is the number. I don't know. I don't have HBO. And I don't really have the time.
Wrong. We'll talk off the air.
We'll come back. We'll tell you what's on tap right after this.
Patterson Legal is the way to go. Call 550